Welcome y bienvenidos to this episode of the Cultural Capacity Podcast. I cannot believe it. We are officially streaming in 33 countries around the world. That is because of you. Thank you. So please be sure you are hitting follow or subscribe on your favorite platforms so we can be in your library and you get notified every Friday when a fresh episode drops of the podcast. You know, once a month we feature a voice, an up-and-coming voice, a current voice, a seasoned voice, all types of voices sharing about their cultural origin story and just some of their path in life. We get a small snapshot sitting at the cultural capacity table. And this month's featured voice is no different. I have to first say, I have a lot of bias with this guest because she is not only a colleague and confidant, but she is a dear friend. We are just ending her birthday season. She is a Leo and we are entering mine. I am a Virgo. So of course, this is perfect timing to air her episode and feature her voice. Miss Lynda Hodges. Not only have we worked in the K-12 space together, we have just shared a lot of memories and a lot of life in probably a short amount of time. So I want to shout her out and also say, I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. I always am learning from our guests. And I know they're learning with me and with you. And we are all here on this little blue planet learning together through all 8 billion some perspectives that we hold all over the world. So I thank you for showing up mostly for yourself today and for tuning into this episode. As always, you can find us on our official YouTube channel where you can stream these interviews, where you see me and the guests. That's where we encourage you to view. So be sure you hit the link below if you want to watch this interview and not just listen. Or if you do prefer just listening during your commutes, maybe you're cooking dinner or grilling, etc. Whatever you're doing when you listen to podcasts, we are on Audible, we're on Apple, Google, Spotify, as well as Amazon and a couple other different platforms. So be sure that you are getting notifications from us. Most importantly, you do not want to miss out. Every episode, every week, we always have aligned resources for you in our show notes. So in the show notes is where we're going to put any aligned resources that complement that particular episode. So when you subscribe, once a month, you're getting an episode on workplace wellness featuring Kara Gonzalez-Howard, our vice president of marketing, as well as has an extensive background in healthcare and nursing, along with suicide prevention, just a lot of different elements where she has served for over 20 years. And then myself having a K-12 education background, we are just really thrilled to continue to grow our team and to grow our brand and expand. And we want you along for the ride. So be sure that you hit subscribe on your preferred way and always check out our show notes because that is where we're going to put the most current offers, services, retreats, different things and resources. And specifically for these featured voices, it is where you will find links to directly connect with these singers, these authors, these superintendents, these pastors, all the different types of people that we've had and we will continue to have. So I'm so excited as we enter into quarter 3 here, full steam ahead. And I also encourage you to reach out to our team if you have questions or you would like to feature one of the people you've seen or myself. Whoever and however you want to get in touch with us, that information is always in the show notes too. You can always reach out to info@educatoraid.com for any booking inquiries, speaking engagements, or if you're also interested in being a guest on our podcast, that's probably the easiest way to get in touch with us because it is an invite-only type application process. And so those are the ways that you can get in touch with us. But most importantly, do not sleep on those resources, especially the ones that help you connect further and deeper with our featured voices guests. Without further ado, I hope you enjoyed this conversation just as much as I did. We had an absolute blast. This is a conversation with the Lynda Hodges. Welcome y bienvenidos to this episode of the Cultural Capacity Podcast. I am your host and guide, Justine Gonzalez, also the founder of Educator Aid Incorporated. We sponsor this podcast ourselves, and as such, I would be remiss if I didn't encourage you to check out some opportunities not only for giving back, but also for expanding your own knowledge in your leadership journey. So the first thing I want to introduce you to is in the show notes. I need you to go there right now. And in the show notes, there are always going to be a section just for resources with any episode that we put out. Now, our team takes time to make sure that these resources are aligned to the content of each episode. We are also getting better, and I'll tell on myself as the hostess here. We are getting better about our release schedule. And one of the things that you can expect as a subscriber to this podcast and or our YouTube page, which is where you can see these interviews, I would encourage you to hit subscribe for sure on the link to our YouTube page below. But this is where we put the freebies, the resources, the articles that align with the content of the episodes, and all of the details you need for connecting with our guests on our featured voices episodes like this one here that you're about to dive into. I want to specifically draw your attention to the very first link in the resources, which is going to remain there for quite some time. I've gotten the pleasure of serving on the board of the nonprofit Educate Me Foundation for nearly 3 years. And at Educate Me Foundation Incorporated, we are a social enterprise that is determined to increase the number of men and women of color in the field of education specifically. We seek to change the education system by creating a continuum for men and women of color to grow, achieve, and succeed from high school to career. And at this point, you can check out the website, but I specifically linked there if you could be willing to even commit to giving $5 a month through the giving campaign. It would be greatly appreciated. Welcome y bienvenidos to another amazing episode of the Cultural Capacity Podcast. I'm so excited to introduce you to this month's featured voice guest, Miss Lynda Hodges. We will get to her in just a moment. But as always, I want to welcome each and every one of you tuning in. I want to encourage you, if you are listening on one of your podcast platforms like Spotify or Apple, Audible, we're on Amazon Music, I think now, Google, I don't know, wherever you listen to podcasts, we want to encourage you to also look at the show notes and head over to our YouTube and hit subscribe. Also, if you prefer to see the human interaction, then you can also view and stream the video version of our once a month featured voices extended episodes. So be sure you always check out the resources in the show notes. The final one too, if you are listening to this and you see this, we always have free learning resources on our website. So you want to be sure to visit educatoraid.com, the sponsor of this podcast. All right, without further ado, if you have tuned into these episodes, you also know that I love to give each guest their flowers. I really believe in giving people flowers while they are here with us. And this guest is no different than any other I have, in that she's going to get her flowers before she gets her introduction. So Lynda, Miss Lynda, I have known Lynda almost a decade. We're going on that mark of knowing each other. It's kind of incredible now that I'm saying it out loud. But Lynda, first of all, I want to say that I really admire about you your tenacity, your vibrant spirit, and also your ability. Something I also look up to you for is your ability to bounce back. So when I say Lynda is one of the most resilient, persistent people I've met, no matter what she has experienced or going through in life, you are going to see the love of God shining through her eyes, shining through her smile. So my friend, my colleague, one of the first people who believed in me when I started my consulting firm, I thank you for being a guest here. And I also just wanted to say those things to you and give you those flowers. Lynda, you have a little background, listeners and viewers. We've known each other in different capacities, both worked in the world of school administration. However, Lynda has many, many different roles and career paths of expertise that is just an incredible story. Like, I can't wait until you come out with your first book someday. So without further ado, I'm sure you guys will learn and share more about this doctoral candidate, this person who's a high-performing coach. She's a coach for high performance. You have an MBA. You've worked within government jobs. I mean, she's done it all. And not to mention, you are also a seamstress, a very talented seamstress. I would guess that you made what you're wearing right now. Okay. And she is a professional singer. So if you watch TV at all, you may have seen her on TV on some of the biggest stages. So without further ado, Miss Lynda Hodges, I'm going to hand over the mic to you and you kick us off. Tell us a little bit about who is Lynda.
Oh my goodness. Oh, Justine, my darling, my bestie that I don't get to see often anymore. But my definitely kindred spirit. And that I noticed from the first time we met, even on our phone interview. Yes, Justine interviewed me and hired me for my first job in Indiana. But she asked about my story. So my story is I am a native Washingtonian, and that is Washington, D.C. I was born in D.C. and raised in Maryland, right across the bridge, about 10 miles away. And now I live on the other side, still about 10 miles away. So I have been here, other than the couple of years that I was in Indiana, I've been here all my life. And she's right, I have a lot of interests. And I find that having a business degree, undergrad, and having an MBA really brought me to a place of wanting to educate because of all of my different interests and all of my different opportunities to, whether it's work with people, work for people, do things for people, that really has become my thing. My parents were good government workers because they got that good government job, which was one of the things that Southerners did way back in the 50s, 60s. They got that opportunity to come to DC area because a lot of the agencies are actually here, and they got that opportunity. They came from North Carolina. So part of me, you'll hear, depending on what I say, when I say it, I can sound Southern, even though we're right kind of on the ledge of Southern and Northern. Part of Maryland, they say.
It's its own little area. So this podcast does stream in over 30 countries around the world now. Woohoo! Thank you, listeners. But I do interject some with some different questions so that people have context. I had one quick follow-up because I don't know this, being a born and raised Midwestern person. When you said Washingtonian, I would have immediately thought Washington State in the Northwest. So school us. I'm assuming you know something about that. And like, how does that work in the United States? Because I think that I myself grew up being very confused about Washington, D.C. as a kid. Like, I remember when you learned about the 50 states being confused, like, wait, what?
So Washington, D.C. is the capital of the United States. So even though it's not a state, it is given the same kind of level as a state because it is the national capital city of the United States.
Got it.
it is where the majority of agencies for the federal government, either they're in DC, they are here in Maryland or in Virginia, which is where the DMV, if you've ever heard someone say, I live in the DMV. Oh, you mean Department of Motor Vehicles? No, no. It's the DMV, District, Maryland, Virginia, and it's District, Maryland, and actually Northern Virginia.
Okay.
Considered to be the DMV because it's all within a mile stretch of probably 30 miles.
Yep.
Is the DMV.
Yep.
Because it's almost circular.
Thank you for that context, because we have people from all over, and I'm putting myself out there. I don't think I could have told you exactly what DMV meant. I just have heard it used, right? And I know, that's kind of like Washington, DC area. But if you asked me,
and you're right,
I'm just telling the truth. And I'm a person who was born and lived in the United States. So one other context question then about something you were talking about, and this is for maybe generationally, because we do have listeners from different ages. So for our Generation Alpha, our Generation Z, our millennial, right? For those of us who might not know what you meant by that good government job, and you talked a little bit about the migration, right? Of being from the South and moving.
That's exactly what it is.
Correct. So what did that mean in that era? Just so there's a little context, if listeners are younger or they're like, government jobs, no, like, because it's different. It's a totally different era of what opportunity meant. Can you unpack that just a little bit more?
So in the South, there wasn't, that has changed, but there wasn't a lot of opportunity. The middle class back in the 40s, 50s did not really exist. It wasn't until about the moving into the 50s, 60s, 70s that you saw the migration from the South to the North. Primarily Blacks in the South would move to the DC area or northern, even New York, Chicago, where there were other job opportunities. And the federal government was one of the main areas where you could get benefits, you could get retirement, you would have health care, you would have a regular job that would provide a check every 2 weeks.
Some stability, right? And
stability in work. You would be able to even move up in grade. So in the federal government, they have grade levels. Each grade has 9 or 10, I think it's 9 or 10 steps within each grade. So you could every 6 months get a step increase.
You knew there was opportunity for it
based on if you have education, as you grow, if you gain education, you could gain grade levels. That's where your money increase comes, and that's really how the middle class was able to increase within the Black community.
Thank you.
And a lot of them came here and were able to move up. And in fact, it was even better once they got here from the 40s and 50s, 60s, 70s. I think in the 70s, they started a youth program through the federal government. So DC students, high school students, were able to take summer jobs working in the federal government. When they graduated, they could then work full time. So a lot of my friends who went to public school in DC have retired because they worked from high school, and those years were counted and they were allowed to retire. So before they turned 60, they were able to retire. So those are the those are really the things that are the reasons why we call it the good government job. It's stability, it's ability to move up, and it's the ability to go from low income to at least middle income. But my generation, I think I'm Generation X. I think I'm at the back of Generation X. We were able, because we started going to school. We started going to college. We got master's degrees. We got doctorates. So now we're above middle class. We changed the trajectory of opportunity because we were born here, and it moved us up.
Woo! Okay, thank you again. Thank you, and listeners, viewers, you know this. I try to always ask some pertinent context questions from a cultural lens, because the reality is, if you don't know some of these things that Lynda might be talking about from a generational lens, from a racial lens, from the different ways that we all perceive and see the world every day, then it's like you're speaking different languages, because now, right? Everything you just described is a totally different language to somebody 30, 40 years younger than you.
Absolutely.
Because that's not the reality of the world right now. So to hear that, right, is kind of polar opposite to a lot of the younger generations, and this very, no, we don't need someone controlling us. We don't need somebody to do, like, it's very adverse. And so that's why I just point that out too, because I think culturally, that's why we continue to see so much and just butting heads, because even the way you talk about class, same thing. It's almost like generations, they're getting further apart in their understanding of one another's values and norms. And because and it's not this system of like, the generation Lynda's talking about is better. Like, we can all joke, right? You've all seen memes of like being a millennial, being a right? But at the end of the day, it's not to say, her way of thinking is wrong and it should be Gen Z's. It goes to everything, where it doesn't have to be a hierarchy of a best way, I guess. I don't know.
Well, the thing that I have found is, I have seen people who, believe exactly like that. They believe that it's that's the old way, and that's the way they used to think, and the way they used to think just does not fit with the way the world is now. Well, no, it doesn't. But if that's all you know, and it's going good for you, I say stick with it. I have never been one of those people, though. I was a government contractor. And I was a government contractor because the opportunity for money was a little bit better than federal government. Yes, it was less stable, because if a contract was taken away, which is what happened to me one time when I was working for IRS, Internal Revenue. I was a computer trainer, and we lost the contract to an Alaskan company.
Okay.
Their senator got them an Alaskan. There's a law where Alaskan companies can do no competes.
They have the priority.
All they have to do is show that they have the staff that are able to fulfill the requirements of that contract, and they automatically get it. Time I was working on my MBA, and I was stunned that this could actually happen. And then I looked into it, and it is, I don't know. I know that they are still there, and I know that they are still working contracts. I don't really know what they're up to now, but they were growing then, and it was because of that bill.
Okay.
But I think I was born in the 20th century, but once the 21st century hit, I realized that I think more 21st century than 20th century. So
So you've
A lot.
always, you've probably always been a disruptor of sorts.
Oh, not probably. I always said that in my family, I was the risk taker. That's what I always said. My brother retired from Rockville, Maryland has the state courthouse
Okay.
there, or not state courthouse. They have the courthouse for, I think it's the county,
Okay.
which was Montgomery County there. And he was computer operator and just retired.
Nice.
He was there for 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I haven't done a job for 30 years.
So tell us then a little bit. So your family moved to DMV even after you were born. So
Actually, they moved before I was born.
before you were born.
It was the cutest little story. My parents got married in Goldsboro, North Carolina. That's where they're from,
Okay.
which is about 45 minutes from Durham, Raleigh, Durham area.
Yeah.
And born and raised in Goldsboro, which looks so much like Mayberry that the older I got after watching Andy Griffith's show, every time we would go downtown, and we called it downtown, but my cousins called it uptown. Southern people, I don't understand why, because I didn't know, I hadn't heard anybody else say that. Uptown was what they called it.
Okay.
Anyway, so when we would go there, I would look down the streets and I'm like, okay, is this actually Mayberry? This looks like Mayberry. Anyway, so they grew up there and they got married, and my dad's favorite aunt lived in DC. So they went to DC for their honeymoon.
Okay.
And she talked them into getting a good government job and moving to DC.
There we go. There we go.
And that's what they did. They moved to DC, got a house. They lived in Southeast when I was born. They got a house in Seat Pleasant, which is right across the DC line, about 5 miles away. And lived there, and then moved to Silver Spring.
Okay.
Which is farther closer to Montgomery County, which is one of the higher end.
Okay.
Prince George's County is the lower end, they would say, because we were there. And Montgomery County was the higher end, where the private schools were, and
got it.
Fancy and richer.
How have you seen that area change? So I know you briefly, as she mentioned earlier, listeners, she briefly had been in Indiana, and that's where you've also had and we don't have time to dwell on everything you've done, because I do really want to hear more about your singing career too. But you were a director in a school corporation. You held many different jobs in K-12. So the thing is, that's how we met, was through the K-12 system. She's been a principal, listeners. So I'm circling full circle because I'm going to ask you some other questions, but you've had a lot of these experiences. You spent some time in the Midwest, and then you moved back. And this was just a few years ago. What is it like how have you seen the DMV change from that time of what you just described, one end of town being more wealthy, white, private schools, one end being poor, Black, and public schools? What have you seen change? And I ask this as a curious question. I put a lot out there as far as even just questions, but even for listeners, viewers to understand, I am always fascinated by demographic shifts and how culture changes in places, even geographically. But I also find sometimes that old quote about the more things change, the more they stay the same. I am curious now you've returned. And if you think back to little Lynda, first 10 years of your life, and now where you are now as a Gen Xer living in DMV.
So the probably most bizarre change really shouldn't be a bizarre change because it happens basically everywhere. So one of the things about the DMV is we have a metro system, subway system, which some areas don't.
Yeah.
And that was one thing that was bizarre to me in the Midwest, was the fact that there was no, if you didn't do the bus system, then you had to get a cab or Uber or walk. There was no train system. So here, Washington, D.C. was called the Chocolate City because the residents were primarily Black when I was growing up. The workers who were on higher levels, who were usually white, lived in Virginia and Maryland. They did not live in DC unless it was Capitol Hill, which is the closest to the White House and the Capitol. That's where they would live. That's about as close. Or Georgetown. Georgetown is probably the highest in terms of money, income. That's where business owners live out in Georgetown. That's on the other side of downtown, which is what DC is called. Growing up, we would go to DC, go to the parks, go to stores, go to events, and we would see Black people everywhere. There's a street called U Street. And if you ever come to DC, I have to take you to U Street. U Street is where the restaurants are, the clubs are, Ben's Chili Bowl, which I've never been to. Don't tell anybody. Ben's Chili Bowl is one of the big celebrity spots. He has pictures of all celebrities that have been to the Ben's Chili Bowl, and he has chili everything. Everything is chili, chili, chili. And I've never been there. I drive past it to get to the church I sing at on Sundays. I just
That's common though. I think, like, for example, I have a lot of friends that were born and raised in Chicago and they've never gone to Sears Tower, now Willis Tower, but I think that that's pretty normal if it's a place you're Okay, so yes.
So anyway, the Chocolate City. Well, now they call it, well, I don't know if they call it that, but it's basically the Oreo flip. It's a flipped Oreo city.
Interesting.
Because now I would say that a lot of cities, major cities that have subway systems, at some point, at some time, somebody would think, well, maybe people want to be close to everything and not have to drive. So let's put up some housing and make it connecting to that system. And that's what happened here. They had already started gentrification in the 90s. So we were seeing the evidence of it happening. We were seeing projects being torn down. We were seeing low-income housing torn down, and then building up condos for $300,000 and apartments for $2,000 a month. It got to a point where Eastern Market is an area that does a weekend farmers market and artist area. They also have a flea market. So it's a part of the city. It's on 7th Street. So it covers a block of two blocks one way. And then it takes up the parking lot of the school that was there.
Okay.
At one point, that was the only time you would see white.
Mm.
Now I've gone because there's a consignment shop there.
Mm-hmm.
Clothes Encounters of a Second Kind.
Oh, I like that.
Favorite. It's one of my favorite.
Powder.
It's one of my favorite shops. I've gotten all sorts of things there. And I remember coming back home and walking through to go to the consignment shop on a Wednesday. You know, it wasn't Saturday, it wasn't Sunday, it was a Wednesday, and I was the only Black person, and there were people everywhere.
Wow. So that gives that picture of like what you said, just the patterns over time. And then it's so fascinating. I wish we were further along in humanity than we are. But
The interesting thing, though,
even on a global level, right? You see the same patterns. Yeah.
Yep. The interesting thing, though, is Prince George's County, up until last year, was considered to be one of the top counties for high income Blacks. I live about 3 miles away from Woodmore.
Okay.
Woodmore is basically $1 million homes.
Okay.
And Woodmore is Black.
So you do see the footprint of the migration of the South. You
absolutely
do see the impact generation.
It is, I mean, you can see it here every single day. The great part is that even though, yes, I'm still wondering what happened to all of those people who were in low income projects. Because, you know, usually what they say is if you're making an economic change to that landscape, then you have to provide, you're supposed to provide part of that area with affordable housing
as well.
And the opportunity, that's how my aunt got a townhouse that she's still in, that she's about to pay off. She got in it because they had some low income area, and you were allowed, you still had to apply, you still had to have a certain amount of money, you still, you know, but you were given that opportunity. She had to take a class on finance, and it, you know, it was one of those county kind of opportunity.
This is so valuable, I think, for listeners, but especially like globally, because we know our listenership here too is about 50% is not in the United States. So that's why this is also, I think, very beneficial, not only for different generations or maybe people who maybe just don't know what you're talking about, but have been in the States their whole life. But from a global scale, I would love, you know, leave us voice memo with your questions, comment on YouTube, whatever, with questions you have from around the world if you see this, because I think so many, and I've traveled enough internationally to know, I really feel that people in other countries, and this is probably a lot of the fault of the media, but we do talk obviously about cultural matters here on our podcast, and I love that. It's my passion. But I think so many people who are non-American citizens or residents would be surprised to hear what you're saying. Like, I think it would be surprising, right? When you dig into it, I think there's knowledge of how tense race relations have been in our country for decades on a global scale. But I think because often it's still painted as the American dream. I don't know, but I also will say that I say that with a little bit of trepidation, because I know that perspective is not always clear either. Often we are looked at a certain way for being American because of what you're talking about, right? So it's a precarious status almost, because I do think many people around the world, and especially in your generation, grew up believing in the American dream. And to know that, wow, her own aunt had to do all of those measures just to have a decent place to live.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you weren't a government worker, right? Like, I mean, you could put, so, I mean, that's a huge statement,
Yeah.
but that also, you can see the through lines of, yeah, it's interesting.
The thing that I would say is that regardless of what stops were placed in our face, because my dad started the government as a grade 1.
Okay.
He retired as a grade 13.
So like the steps you were talking about earlier with advancing.
After 37 years, he ended up 13. The other side of that is, I would say during my high school years, he applied for a number of higher ranking positions and either never got an interview or never got the opportunity to go farther than an interview.
Right.
Even though he had the qualifications, he had everything that was required. That was frustrating to watch.
Yeah.
Because he still had to go to work every day. He still had to help people. He still had to mentor people. He still had to go and be head elder at church. He still, so to see him, part of me was thrilled that he was able to do so much. But the other part of me said, that's not fair, that that's all they thought that he was capable, or that's all they wanted him to see to get to. That's where
it was still not equitable or equal.
No.
So that's, and plain and simple then, and I'm guessing most of the more advanced were white.
So back then, yeah.
That's where you still have to see the bigger picture of opportunity. Well,
I wish that my dad were still alive. He worked at the Library of Congress.
Okay.
Which is great because he was a history major.
Perfect.
What I would have loved for him to see is the fact that the librarian now is a Black woman.
Yeah. Yeah.
He would have, I mean, he missed out on Obama. He missed out on the librarian. He would have loved it. He would have loved it. He would have loved it. So yeah. So while yes, there are so many things to be happy about, I love driving past Woodmore. Some days I go the opposite direction just so I can go past and see the locked gates and know that every last one of those houses has a Black person. I remember going to the golf, they have a golf course there. And I went to an event and I drove past and I saw the house. In the middle of the house was glass. And I was like, why would they put glass in the middle of, from the top of the floor down to the basement?
Elevator?
Waterfall.
What? Oh my goodness.
Into a pool. I said, Lord, see. Yes. Yes. I mean, yes. So while
would little Lynda have thought that in her wildest dreams?
No.
And I ask that transparently. It's also very painful to have to think about that, even for, and to paint a picture, especially for our white or white passing, like myself, listeners or viewers. You have to understand the question I'm asking and why I'm saying that's incredibly painful, because she's saying, I couldn't even have imagined 40 years ago, or even 30 or 20 years ago, in the same area that she now lives, she couldn't have even fathomed seeing a Black person in a type of home like you're describing.
No.
So I think that's what I'm trying to break down for just a moment here, for viewers and listeners, subscribers, who that's not your experience, and that's okay. We all have very different experiences. Nobody is a monolith. Nobody is a single, like, every Black person is this way, every white person is this.
Right.
These are facts. And
Yeah.
you can also recognize the fact that that is incredibly sad in certain ways. And like what you're mourning about your own father, like he never saw the first Black president. And so those are things that, like you said, though there's advancement, there's breakthroughs, and that's to be celebrated. You can still mourn and still recognize and name the truth that, yes, this is why we still talk about race.
Yeah.
Yes, this is why we,
and it's okay.
Yeah, and it's okay.
The thing that bothers me the most is people want to put it under the rug, thinking that by doing that, everybody's happy. Well, no, everybody's not happy, because if you don't understand where people come from, and I would say this as a manager, as a leader, you don't take the time to understand where people come from, you have already lost your fight. Fight meaning you have already lost your ability to manage or lead.
Wow.
You don't understand the people that you're working with.
Right.
You're working with them. I don't care if they're doing everything that you say for them to do. You're still working with them. And if you don't gain an understanding of who they are and where they come from and why they do what they do. I found that when I was the behavioral, what was that position called? Behavioral.
Were you a dean?
It hasn't even been that long. And
were you a school dean, behavioral coordinator?
Something like that.
You were like a school dean.
I was like the assistant principal. What they said. I served that.
That's right. You were charged.
But they wouldn't let me have that position title.
You were charged with managing school-wide discipline.
I had to manage the babies.
Goodness.
I had to manage the babies. So that I learned it is difficult for people to try and understand what they're dealing with before trying to discipline.
Yep.
And most of the time during that time frame, that year that I was in that position, I spent more time trying to understand the kid,
connecting,
the actual thing that had gotten them into trouble in the first place.
Well, from a leader, like you're saying, from a leader manager's perspective, no matter your sector, no matter how you're serving or what job you have, if you don't do that, say that you're leading a team of 50 people for a company, a corporation, maybe you're in manufacturing or something, right? Something that you would think, oh, it's just about ROI, it's just about pumping out the products, the supply demand. No, you're managing those 50 people. What if I automatically do if I come in every day? I don't even know your name. I don't know anything about you, blah, blah, blah. Not that you need to know everybody's life story, but if I haven't even taken that time and then I feel like I need to reprimand or give you a bad evaluation or whatever, just think about how that's going to turn out. And we see all of the stuff about retention issues, all of the things that are happening with the changing face of the workforce, meaning changing face means different styles of working
Yeah.
and older ways of wanting to control. But imagine then those 50 people, what have you done if you haven't even had enough care to want to even try to learn their names? What you've done is you have dehumanized and devalued them down to a number. That's
Yep.
so and so, and they fill this number on the line in our production line.
Yep.
You literally turn them into as if they were on a farm in a group of cattle.
Yep.
So it matters. And no matter your environment, I think we all have to start asking ourselves, and we've both been in leadership roles, and I'm sure we've both been, I know I've made big mistakes, just like we've had big victories. But the difference is when you get that feedback. For example, I talk to leaders a lot. A lot of times they don't even want to care about employee engagement surveys, even though they spent time, money, and energy to do them. Why are you asking if you don't care to know? So to bring us back full circle, because I know now we really are getting on our soapboxes. To bring you back full circle, right? You've had all these experiences, all of these perspectives, even through the workplace. If you think back to little Lynda, so maybe 8 or 9 years old, 3rd or 4th grade, what is a principle, like a life principle, that you feel your parents or a family member or just the church, wherever, that was instilled in you from that age that you still carry with you today? And you're like, yeah, I still live by that principle today. And that has proven to be kind of a guiding force or a guiding light that I always come back to in my life.
Yeah. Probably, and you will understand as soon as you hear me say it. I'll see you nodding your head as soon as you hear me say it. My dad told me, it is okay for you to be sad. It is okay for you to even cry. In fact, go ahead and take that moment.
Wow.
Go cry, go be sad,
Yep.
get it out your system, and then get up and keep going.
Yeah.
That has been my modus operandi for my entire adult life.
Wow. No, it's full circle. We didn't plan this, viewers. It's the flowers, your resilience, right? Like, it's really you. That is really who you are through and through. And it's funny because one of my life quotes, she knows I'm nodding big time, but one of my life quotes has been Nelson Mandela. He said, I never lose. I either win or I learn. And also you could say, I never fail. I either win or I learn. And so it's all about that perspective. I used to, when I was still teaching and being a principal, one of the things I used to say to students, if I could see they're really struggling with, I feel bad about this, or I can't let this go, or I don't like this grade, or whatever the thing is that even us as adults struggle with and beat ourselves up about, I would always say, pretend you're crossing the busiest highway in the city and you fall down in the middle of it because you trip over a little rock. Are you going to lay there and not move and cry and go, I'm so embarrassed, I tripped over this rock and everybody's going to see me? Or are you going to brush it off and hurry up and get on? And that isn't to dismiss the pain. So I think that's very valuable to note too. Your father wasn't ever dismissing that you couldn't feel sadness or you couldn't express it. He was saying you work through it and then you still come out the other side. And that might be longer some days, that might be shorter some weeks, whatever. And wow, that's a word. That's a word I needed to hear today. Thank you. Thank you. No, seriously.
Oh, because it bothers me. One thing that I learned when dealing with my dad's passing, it was a 3-week kind of process that we went through before he died. And I realized that with grief, you can't tell somebody that they have grieved enough.
Yeah. Yes.
It has been, where are we at? 16
Mm.
16 years
Mm.
has been since he passed. And I still have moments
Yeah.
where I grieve as if it just happened.
That's
You
important.
can't tell
That's,
somebody
that's important.
that they're done grieving. I mean, I don't know, why are you still grieving? You're still grieving. The pastor at that time of my home church had only been there 3 years, I think. And by this time, my dad had had heart surgery, and then found out about the cancer. And, you watched his weight go completely down, and was part of the people involved in his funeral. We had him, of course, give um, a tribute or whatever. And a year later, it was the date of his death, and the pastor came up to me and he said, people are still grieving. I'm just, I was like, that's because the man helped start the church.
Yep.
Half of the people in this church are here because of him. So don't stop people from grieving just because you didn't know him like they did.
Right.
And that's the thing that I learned, is that, everybody, even my family members, everybody grieves differently, and you cannot stop them from what they're grieving. You can help them move through the process. You can give them examples of how to handle, but you cannot tell them to stop grieving.
And
You
that,
can't.
I think that's such an important lesson, not only for grief, Lynda, but anything. You cannot force someone to go faster or slower
Yep.
or right.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I think that might be one of the biggest plights of humanity, right?
Yeah.
Is that you can't actually force or control somebody to make them do something else, unless you go into a zone of carnage meaning like killing them, enslaving them. And
Right.
that's been the MO of the world for the past
Yeah.
3,000-4,000 years,
Yeah.
probably much longer in the eternity of time and all that, right? Whatever you believe. But I'm saying that to say that hasn't worked well for us. Humanity having carnage and war upon one another, to me, that isn't actually natural, because to me, as beings, we're designed with a soul and a heart to love. So when we step over that threshold of carnage to try to control and have power over others, I think that's where that is still something that messes with so many of us, from conditioning, from all you see, like
It's
even
stepping
your story, you talk about the evolving of humanity. You've seen it.
when you step outside of true humanity, because true humanity is more of being a part of one another
Yeah. Unity.
without the need for one another to be like one another.
Yes.
The cult mentality is not human. That is not. Yes, everybody wants to be a part of something, but it is not human to demand that everybody act the same way, talk the same way, look
Right.
the same way. That is not human. And truthfully, that's something that all groups, all teams, all organizations need to take a step back on that,
All
because
families,
demand someone.
all families, all
Yeah.
like
Oh, yeah. To
everything, any
demand
group,
that
any.
someone, if that happened to me, because I always say I am the different one. And I really am. I am the different one. I'm the one that asks the question. I want to always know why. I always say I'm the devil's advocate in the family. I ask all the different questions, that's who I am. And it's not to start any trouble. It's just because I want to know. I used to ask my dad in the car, Daddy, where do clouds come from?
Hey, we get it. This is literally called Curious Compassionate or Compassionately Curious on the podcast.
And it didn't even bother me if he didn't have the answer.
Right.
Oh,
okay. Well, I think it's just, my light turned off, but that must be telling me it's on. But that makes so much sense. Also, why I think we had a kind of instant connection and kindred spirits, because we don't take it personally. Like, I think both of us spend a lot of time like pontificating. Like, my head is full of questions a lot of times, and it can be like, what could I make with zucchini blossom? Like, literally, that is what my head is always doing. I'm not doing it to be annoying, but I've realized into adulthood, sometimes I've actually had to like explain that to people because they found it very alarming and disarming, are two words I've been told. And I'm like, I just genuinely was wanting to know.
Or you think yourself better to, you better than that. You trying to embarrass me? You're intimidating.
No,
that's what
I've gotten that too. But it's a genuine curiosity. Like, if you'll actually know if I'm probably not interested in speaking with you, because I won't probably be asking questions.
I'll say, "Oh, nice to meet you," and I'll walk away.
See you later. Oh, goodness. Well, look, there's another taste. Viewers, listeners, we all think differently. We all see the world differently. And a lot of that has to do with our personality structure, how we were brought up. Yes, of course, how we look, how we speak, but a lot of it has to do with the mind, the heart, and the soul, and how we actually view the world from the seat we sit. So to kind of wrap us up and bring us home, Lynda, I'm going to I first want to share my screen really quick. I have one more question for you, but if you all have not visited it, this is the official Educator Aid website. And if you go on here, yes, we have free resources, we have a bunch of stuff, but if you go to meet our team, one of our incredible network consultants is Miss Lynda Hodges. And we've gotten to work together in a lot of different capacities over the years. However, I am just grateful that sometimes we get to work with her at Educator Aid. She has her own things that I'm going to have her plug and talk about here. But one of the first is, I will also share, is your Calendly link. I'm going to share in the show notes if people wanted to actually like book a coaching session with you, and I'll pull up your page in a minute. But I wanted you all to know this. So if you want to go to the site, you want to research her more, because maybe you want her to be your coach, whatever the case is. But she is part of our network team here at Educator Aid, and I'm honored and humbled that I still get to work with you. And you're also super patient with me, because I get wild ideas. But you truly are my kindred spirit, because we're both very like creative. We love to try new things and we just go with the flow. So tell us, this final question is really about, what are some things you're working on right now? What are the ways people can get in touch with you? Like, shamelessly share whatever you're putting out into the world, speaking to existence, and also just the opportunities for people to learn more about you and work with you. I'm going to pull up your Calendly while you speak.
Okay. Calendly is probably the best way to get in touch with me, or my email address is lynda.hodges@gmail.com. Because I haven't done a whole lot. And that's the other thing. She was fussing about book. Yes, I'm supposed to be doing a book. Haven't started working on the book. I mean, I have, but I haven't.
Wait, in your due time, what did we all just talk about? In due time, I'm not forcing you. Sorry.
No, because it's actually 2 books that I need to write, but we'll get that all together. But I'm working on a curvy girl design. Yeah. So if you go on my Facebook, it's Lynda R. Hodges.
Okay.
Every week I post something that I've made because I am a curvy girl,
Me
which
too.
for Black people, that's what we are. Even skinny women are curvy. But a lot of the clothing are made for models who are sticks so that they can make the clothes look a certain way, and they don't, even if it's supposed to be for our size, it does not fit right. So I decided to finally go through the process of selling my stuff, which is more curvy, which will celebrate the body, which, a lot of the stuff that would be for our size doesn't really celebrate the body, and I don't like that.
Yeah, agreed.
So that's one thing that I'm doing. That's Lynn's Treasures is what it's called. And
So
actually,
really quick,
Facebook.
Lynda, so people can
Mhm.
find you. She does
Yep,
have a public profile. This is what it looks like on Facebook. We'll put all the links in the show notes. So if you're just listening, you're like, wait, I'm not looking at this. We always put it in the show notes with her biography so you can find her, but we'll link her direct Facebook on this. Is this where they find Lynn's Treasures, or should they go?
Lynn's Treasures is a page, Facebook page.
Okay, great. So on
Yeah.
here, we'll look for Lynn's Treasures really quick so we can show it. But tell us about Lynn's Treasures. Oh, there it is. Boutique store.
Lynn's Treasures is all the stuff that I've made. It's that's a pin that I made. It's a brooch.
Oh, that's
I did it. It was a butterfly
yeah.
because my thought is most people have a process of becoming a butterfly.
Yeah.
Whether it's growth, whether it's getting, coming out of trials or situations. And I decided to try and create something. So I created these butterflies, as well as some spoken word on brooches, like
Nice.
try again, be your best,
Encouragement.
have hope.
That's encouragement.
Encouragement. Yeah.
I will
Yeah.
also say, if you're listening or viewing this, one of our most recent events with a client for Educator Aid is Lynda served as a keynote speaker for one of their women's conferences. Just a kind of a mid-year one. We did some virtual things for this company, but you are available for different events like that independently. That people know when they contract with us, they're free to do what they want. And she knows I'm the opposite of what we were talking about with the control stuff, but there's setbacks to that too, of course. I was like, ooh, what direction? But I always tell people on the podcast that I'll tell on myself. But this is your official Calendly. And
Yep.
in this, you can set up a free consultation, but most of your coaching, you tell us a little bit who you work with. And also you guys can see here, it says life is full of ups and downs. We can be overwhelmed with either. I'm here to support you through these challenges, positive and negative. Let's meet. So just talk to us a little bit about what people can expect if they engage with you as a personal coach or even a professional executive coach.
A lot of what I realize is it doesn't matter what level you're on. Everybody has a point where they're either overwhelmed,
yes,
or they're not really sure what to do next.
Yep.
It could be a new job, it could be a new opportunity, it could be the same job that you just want to see more progress. It could be just your life in general. I can be that benchmark, that sounding board, that person who can help you move to that next place.
Nice.
I can provide you with insights. I can really help you. And I'm saying this based on the things that I've been able to help people through.
Yep.
And see you through to that other side of getting up, as opposed to staying flat or going down.
Yes. And I'm going to give my own shameless recommendation, that if you work with Lynda, you can tell already from the personality, from the conversation, you will not only get somebody who is transparent and direct and knows where to guide and lead, but you will also get somebody who is cheerful and encouraging and also motivational and willing to talk through whatever you need. So yeah. Oh my goodness. I feel like I learned so much specifically about the DMV. Right? Because I've been to Washington, D.C. like once in my whole life. So, and it was very minimal time period and when I was a teenager. So I don't always know a lot of the ins and outs. I do have colleagues there and colleague friends, but haven't spent a lot of time there myself. So I appreciate you also entertaining all of the like context questions. So, we like to be inclusive with our listeners here. I want to thank you again for your time, and also just your willingness to share pieces of your story with us. All the good, the not so good, and the getting better. So thank you all again. Make sure you hit subscribe so you get notified. So thrilled that we could have Miss Lynda Hodges on here again. Keep an eye out. She pops up in a lot of national and international stages singing. So I'm just saying, go over to her Facebook, use the resource links, get in touch with her, and that'll be all. I just want to encourage you, as I encourage myself, you, the listeners, you, the subscribers. Let's continue to get compassionately curious together. Take care. Until next time. Thank you so much for showing up for yourself, first and foremost, and for sitting down to have a conversation with us in this episode of the Cultural Capacity Podcast. I'm your host, Justine Gonzalez, and I encourage you to first and foremost check out our website, educatoraid.com, as well as any of the linked resources in the resource section of our show notes. And finally, be sure you hit subscribe on your preferred platform. For podcast preference, we stream on Audible, Amazon Prime, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Don't forget to give us a 5-star review when you're over there on those platforms. And then you can also click to subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is also in the resource section of our show notes. The reason why you would want to subscribe to our YouTube channel, number one, it is where we stream and premiere all of our featured voices interviews, which also include video, especially if you want to see, hear, interact with, and feel like you are sitting down a part of the conversation. I would always recommend that modality. However, it's also the place where we're going to continuously be releasing free high-level learning workshops for you and your team. So you're going to want to hit subscribe to the Educator Aid Incorporated official YouTube channel, as well as check out all of the resources that we put in the resource section of the show notes. Again, thank you for tuning into this episode of the Cultural Capacity Podcast. Let's continue to get compassionately curious together.